Right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this, I think it's afternoon now. I'm really excited to have Whitney here. Before I turn it over to Whitney, I just want to acknowledge that I am currently living, working, playing, and learning on the unceded and ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Coast Salish people. I'm incredibly grateful to be on this land and to be able to benefit from this land. So now I'm going to turn it over to Whitney, and she's going to take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your weekend to spend time not only with myself, but all the other amazing presenters that have been here to help us women grow in our speaker series. So thanks for tuning in. What I'd like to go over with you today is a concept that a lot of us talk about. We talk a lot about high performance and those athletes and how do we get those athletes there. So the topic I want to talk to you about is kind of that bubble player mentality of how do we get players over and beyond that bubble. So we're going to burst that bubble today, and we're going to talk about creating high performance athletes. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Whitney Juszkiewicz. My pronouns are her, she. And I just want to create an inclusive space for everybody. So I do apologize if some of my pronouns, I may say guys, and I don't mean specifically to men. It's just a vocabulary that I am working on changing. It's a vocabulary I grew up with, talking with my friends and just saying that they're my pals. So I do apologize if some of those slip out today, and it is something that we are working on. So a little bit about myself. Edmonton, Alberta is my hometown. That's where I grew up, minor hockey, and then my major hockey career was in Edmonton. And then I got myself a scholarship. I decided to stay in Canada as opposed to going to the States. And also I grew up in a time there wasn't very many opportunities south of the border. So they were just starting to get into, in a university, intercollegiate, NCAA type programming. But I played for the University of Alberta. It was U Sport nowadays, but back in the day, it used to be the CIS. Played for Team Alberta as a senior woman. So when I was done my career, I came back and continued to play. I'm currently right now located in Vancouver. I live in the Lower Mainland. I'm a high performance one coach, and I've also gone out and gotten Hockey Canada Skills coaching certification. And a huge project and program that I'm a part of now is the Female Master Coach Developer with Hockey Canada. And so what that is kind of also part of the reason why I'm here with you today is because we're being trained as Master Coach Developers on how to train other leaders in multi-sport. So not just in hockey, which is my sport of choice, but in all multi-sports. So we're going to talk about today concepts, and not necessarily sport specific ones, but ones that you can apply into your specific sports. I'm also a lead skills instructor for BC Hockey. So a lot of development at the provincial level, working around our province. I used to be the program of excellence coordinator for the female side. And also I worked in multiple minor hockey associations, either as operation coordinators, executive directors. And I have an exciting position that I'm not allowed to announce, but I'm very excited to be moving and working with another group this year. But when that makes public knowledge, I can then share that out there. So keep your eyes on my social media, I guess. I've also created my own company, and you're going to see a lot of that branding coming out in today's presentation, and that's the Fire and Ice Hockey Development. I've been doing that since about 2015, and that's a really great program that helps athletes, female athletes, work with other high performance female athletes. But also a really huge part was coaching. Coaching came from that. I found that I was working with a lot of women who maybe didn't get that opportunity to take control of practice or get paid what maybe they should be getting paid in a spring type program. And so I really developed an opportunity, and it was wonderful this year. We had 6 brand new coaches, come out, and a lot of them are working in their communities this coming season. So I take a lot of pride in being an opportunity for those women to get mentorship and to get training. So that's a bit about me. A thing that I wanted to put into this is not just to show you all the cool things that I like to do, but I think it's also important, and we're going to talk about the importance of it in this presentation, that we recognize not just what our credentials say, but also who we are as a people. Like, what are the things that we like to do? So I decided to just throw this quick clip in there to kind of say, you know, like, I'm an avid golfer. I've been doing it my whole life. It's a huge part of my pastime. I just embraced paddle boarding, and I've literally been on vacation for a week and tried to get on the water as much as possible. So it's something that I dig into. I love the stability and the grind of the physical aspects. So I do ride motorcycles. That's a part of my life. I enjoy two wheels, and snowboarding is a good cross sport for me, especially living in Vancouver. We have beautiful mountains right in our backyard. And then there's some really interesting parts here. You might see me looking as a referee, and then a bunch of people wearing the same clothes, and even some weird contraption hanging behind my head there. I also, a lot of people don't know, but I spent a lot of time in the film industry. I have a degree. I spent 8 years training, not only in stage for theater, but as well as film. And so that's actually how I got to Vancouver, was the film industry. And so these are clips of actually the Mighty Ducks show that was filmed during the pandemic. And so when the hockey season was down, I was still having a lot of fun with hockey, but in front of the camera. So I worked as a double for one of the actors. And then I also did a lot of other stuff, whether I was a hockey player or a referee. So if you're watching that, you might be able to catch a quick glimpse of me flying through your screen. So let's talk about today. What exactly are we here to accomplish today? I'm going to try to keep this into about a 40-minute presentation, give you opportunities to ask questions. But let's just quickly go over what we're going to take home today. So we're going to go through that. What is high performance? And that's kind of a loaded question, but we're going to break it down. We're going to go through more high performance leadership. So if we're also trying to create that environment, then there must be some kind of traits that we bring to become high performance leaders. And then lastly, we're going to look at those pillars that actually are creating that high performance situation for our athletes. I'll give you guys some resources. I'm also going to leave these slides available through Amy, just because there is a lot of information and I don't want you guys missing out as you're trying to quickly write everything down. So I got you on that one. Don't worry, I got your cheat sheets. Then we'll have some questions. So again, some take homes for today. What are we looking at potentially getting out of our presentation? I'd like you to have a better understanding of how to reach high performance. And we're going to go through exactly what do I mean by reaching high performance, because it's a very interesting thing. Clearer awareness. So I want you guys to be more clear of the factors that will help you create that performance. What are those factors? Let's develop a better awareness of how we actually create that performance environment. And then also to, again, I mentioned that I'll be offering resources and material kind of as a starting point. Sometimes there's a lot of material and it can be very overwhelming if you're not 100% sure on what you'd want to look into first on getting some ideas. And then again, I'm hoping that maybe by the end of this, you would have had another perspective on the subject and maybe built more into your repertoire. So something that I always do, I think it just kind of comes from my education, spending time in the English department, is I always like to look into words. So when we talk about high performance, I always go first off into my dictionary, into the encyclopedia, and I start doing research on what the words are. What does it mean? So I know it's kind of, silly that I found Wikipedia, but it does actually match up with a lot of the other really credible definitions. But high performance itself, when we talk about high performance, it's actually sport at the highest level of competition. And that's where we have more of that emphasis on those winning. So we're now more result oriented in our sport on how we train. So that's one thing that I wanted to be very interesting. And I wanted to almost separate when we look at high versus performance. So the high section, as we look at that, is more result oriented. And as we know, as coaches, to sit there and focus on our results is a bit of a trap and may not actually result to success in the end. So I just kind of wanted to bring that out. When I looked up the definition, I found it very interesting that the high part on the high performance was very result oriented. So then I dug deeper and I said, okay, well then let's do a little evaluation here on sports performance. What exactly is that part? Because I think that's where we're going to find more of the meat and potatoes of how we create this high performance. So when we look at sports performance, and this is referencing from encyclopedia.com, is that sports performance is a manner where we can actually measure certain factors. And we'll break down those factors in a second here. But those areas that are very important is the measuring of it. So when we know that we're going to be looking at measuring the performance within our sport, then we can then go towards saying, okay, let's see how close we are to getting to high performance, AKA the results aspect. So that's really why I want to make a distinguish in this presentation, even though we have on the title, you know, creating a high performance environment. I really want to fixate and work with you ladies to make sure that we are creating a performance environment. The high comes after we started to actually know how to create performance. So let's dig into that. So as I said, it's all about the performance. And what we want to look at in that are these major factors that resonate. Some of these maybe similar words to what you've seen in other readings or other type of case studies, but a lot of it resonates that they're all synonyms of the same kind of words. And so these factors break down to a neuromuscular factor. Okay, and that's more the physical makeup of what your skeletal structure is, the physical makeup of your muscles, you know, how your body stores fat, how your body builds muscle. So what we are physically from a biological manner, what we have as a tool. Then we go into another factor, which is more of that mental control. So in the first phase, we may be talking about, in the first factor, pardon me, we may be talking about more of like, what's the actual composition of my brain? What do I have as an actual make and model of my body? The second one is, how do I control that? How do I control the abilities of that brain, of that mental capacity? And then also the psychological factors. So those two are kind of hand in hand. Then we move into another one where there's factors of the emotional conditioning. And that is a huge one that I think you're starting to see resonate through a lot of professionals. We focused a lot, I would say, back in the day. I know I'm not that old, but, you know, earlier in the 80s and 90s, like when I was growing up and I was being trained, it was a lot of what does your body have? How can we change your body? How can we build it? And then, okay, you know, let's talk about visualization. But that was about it. You know, they just kept saying, well, you got to be mentally tough. So now what we're discovering is that there's a third connection to that, and that's that environmental conditions. And we'll look into what that really means more later. The last one is where we fit. And one major reason why we're here today, which is coaching and the external support for the athlete. So our athletes, they need all of those factors to be successful. But what they're going to be mostly focusing on is those main three. Their body, the physical part of that, then they're going to be working on their brains, and then they're going to be working on controlling and managing those environmental stimulants. But for us as coaches, we need to make sure that we are bringing our best self to that fourth factor, because our athletes need us. They rely on the coaching and the external support to keep them going so they can stay strong in those three factors. And that's why you see on those pictures there, I have the three pointing to the athlete. And then we have that last factor coming to us, and that's where we're going to grow. So one thing I felt was really interesting, and I really love quotes, and I'm sure there's a lot of you that also agree that you enjoy those quotes. And so one thing I found with Aristotle was a nice quote where he goes, we are what we repeatedly do. We are what we repeatedly do. Not what we think, not what we talk, it's what we do. So excellence then is not an act, but it's a habit. Just because we speak excellence, just because we talk it, if we're not walking it, it's not a habit, and we're always chasing it. So I always find sometimes when you really break down those words, you can really dig in. It's the action. It's the action that's important. So when we're working about those actions, well, we need to measure them. So those factors that we talked about on the previous slide, those need to be measured, and they need to be measured often. Otherwise, we don't know how we're progressing. Right? It's these factors that build the athlete's performance. And it's those factors that we talked about that allow the coaches to outline their long-term athlete player development. You will have no idea where you should be putting your efforts if we haven't analyzed where we're starting with those factors. So again, it was a physical factor. So what are their bodies at currently? You know, what's their bone structure, their muscle density? What's their ability to recover? Can they recover quickly, or do they need more hours? Do they need more time off to recover from a very strenuous competition or even training session? So I will give you, like I said, a bunch of resources, but these are some things that I've pulled out. So there's a book called Performing Under Pressure, and it was by Dr. Saul. And I actually met him at a coaching clinic. It was one of my very first coaching conferences that I went to, and I happened to be sitting next to him. We got into talking at lunch, and I realized, holy moly, you're a very successful doctor in sports. And we just got talking, and he said, have you ever read my book? I said, I had not really. And he gave it to me kind of on the spot, signed it and gave it to me. And I was taken back by all of the wonderful resource material in it. And so I will give you the link to that book if you're at all interested. But what it basically does is he does a wonderful job at breaking down the athlete, you know, from head to toe, as I call it, in all of those aspects. And then it's a really nice book that you can have actually an actual action plan in it that you can follow. And sometimes people really need that. They need something that they can follow. But the biggest thing when we talk about those physical factors is that we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's not just from our sports psychologist, Ken. He came up with that one. That's where he gets kind of, but I've also heard in the military. Like I've heard it in the US military and their Marine Corps, that is literally what they also teach their soldiers, is that you're not cold as they're sitting in the ocean getting pelted by wave after wave. You're not cold, you're uncomfortable. You're not exhausted, you're uncomfortable. And that's something that has really resonated and that I brought into my coaching on the field with my athletes, was that we are just uncomfortable. We've prepared, we've gotten to ourselves to this point, and now here we are, we're uncomfortable. And when we accept that uncomfortable and we just move past it, then we can then break barriers and move into that next level. Our bodies do not want to push past being uncomfortable. That is usually when we say, no, it's time to take a rest. No, it's time to go get some food. No, it's time to relax and get out of here. So the reality is, though, that when we are in that uncomfortable state, that is when we are able to actually learn. That is where we will then start to have massive gains in our abilities, is that uncomfortable state. And there's another great book that I will give you guys the reference to, and some of you have read it, pardon me, which is The Champion Mind. And they talk about that uncomfortable state. How do you push yourself through that? And that will lead us then into those mental factors. So now we've talked about the physical factors, you know, we're going to have to worry about our trainers. We're going to have to worry about all of that. But now we're moving into those mental factors. So what are the athlete, as we're analyzing, before we can even start planning, what are they able to bring to the training session? What's their processing ability? What's their personal awareness? Are they very aware, or are they completely oblivious to things around them? And we have to create that awareness. What's the education that they're bringing into it? Have they had other coaches? Do they have a knowledge of the sport? Has it been in their family? Is this brand new to their family? Is this brand new to them? And what's their assertiveness? Are they able to have conversations with you as a coach? Or are they scared and just standing and waiting to be told, right? When you're talking about those athletes that are trying to get to high performance levels and they're wanting to see those results, those athletes are having relationships with their coaches. They're talking, they're thinking things through. So there's a really amazing book called Conscious Coaching. I couldn't find it, but now when I did another look, oh, it's everywhere. And I highly suggest going after it. It's a beautiful book, easy to read, but it talks about discipline and punishment, and that they're not the same thing. And it's talking about how to get the athlete to buy in. And the big thing, people get nervous about discipline, but discipline is an amazing thing because it gives people meaningful work to do. And discipline can look very similar to punishment, but punishment is just breaking people meaninglessly. It's just putting them through the ringer, you know, pushing them down, and what are you accomplishing at the end of it? Discipline is the opposite. You have a very clear reason why you're doing things. You have a very strict pattern of doing those things, and you have accountability. And there's nothing negative in that if you're doing it in a positive, constructive manner. So then we then acknowledge again that emotional factor. Like, who is the person in the uniform? What are their experiences in life? every single person, even every single person on this call right now, you're all coming to this call with different experiences, and that will decorate who you are and how you receive this information. Your heritage. What are your customs? You know, how do you identify? What are your pronouns and your values? What are your goals and the dreams? All of those things are things that we need to take into account as coaches, because those are the people, and how are they doing today as they stand in front of us ready to work. And there's another wonderful book that I love called Relentless, and that's by Tim Grover. And if you're a basketball fan, you'll love this book because he's done so much work with some of the greatest basketball players in the world. And you get really great stories if that's what you like. But the nice thing that they talk about is kind of 3 different personality characteristic traits. Is they have a closer, a cleaner, and cooler. And on every team, they're finding, after they've done enough research and they've done enough kind of observation, that it's pretty consistent to say in every sport that you're going to find these 3 characteristic traits. So the closer tends to be someone who's going to get the job done, but they're going to get the job done exactly how you wanted them to do it. So if you had a specific play, maybe it was in hockey, let's say we were attacking on a weak side where everybody was looking one way and we're coming in what we call the back door, then that player, and that's our strategy, they're going to execute that for you every day of the week, and they're going to probably capitalize, and you're going to be cheering and excited on the results. That's your closer. In that, you have a cleaner. And your cleaners, they're really those people that people are like, I don't really understand them. They're a little weird. They're a little off. Some people in hockey will call that our goalies, but it's not just the fact that they're weird or that they're as they say, not understood. And they're okay with that. They love being unique. They love being different. If they were normal, it would probably destroy them inside. They love their unique and creativity. And those are our playmakers. Those are the people that see things just slightly different, and they're able to create the opportunity for the closer to finish. So those are really important people on our teams. And then you have the coolers. Those are the more careful, more reserved athletes on our team. They like to watch how things are working, and then they tend to follow the leaders. They're amazing participants on our team. They contribute, they work, but they're not the ones that are going to really stray outside the lines and break outside those boxes. So these are the resources that I was mentioning. So these are resources for understanding performance. And like I said, I'll be sending you the slides so you don't have to worry about trying to hang on to all this information. And also too, I think these are also links that if you click them, it'll take you to be able to find them. So again, this is the conscious coaching. It's the art of buying in. Then the champion's mind that I talked about. This one is a really great one that goes through the entire body. The playmaker's advantage, those are those cleaners that I talked to you about. And this is a great book for trying to understand your playmakers. Where are those people coming from? How do they relate, and how can I relate to them? Relentless. And in this one here too, that's that performing under pressure from Dr. Saul Miller. Really, really great book. And I would even buy that one and share it with my athletes. If you have older athletes that are really wanting almost something to dig into, people that like reading and like having almost like a working journal, that's a great book for an athlete to share with one, especially university. So we talked about kind of that, what is high performance? So now let's lead into that leadership. It was the 4th factor, how we talked about that we want to bring our best self. So I thought it was really a good idea to bring in the NCCP core coaching competencies. And the NCCP is our national coaching certification program. And so that is multi-sport. So that's not just the hockey specific where I come from. That's every single sport that you guys might find yourselves participating or leading. So when we look at those core competencies that we should be bringing as a coach to the table, we have the problem solving, we have the valuing, the critical thinking, leading, and interacting. But those can be kind of very general terms. So let's break them down just a little bit more so we can get a better idea. So in problem solving, like how would you do that as a coach? Well, that could be you bringing a solution to a very complex situation. Lots of moving factors, lots of things happening, and being able to maybe see that bigger picture and then break it down into an actionable solution. Then there's those times where you do a lot of planning, everything changes on you, and are you going to fall apart, or are you going to be able to modify and change on the fly? And so that's your problem solving skills that you're bringing to the table, as well as being able to identify training priorities. So as you're sitting there watching your group, working with your group, are you able to identify the shift in priorities? You know, if you're working with a basketball team, well, our dribbling skills are not very good. We're not able to handle the ball, and we're barely even getting down the court. So we're not going to spend as much time on our shooting today. We're going to adjust that training planning. So that's your problem solving skills. And those are very important for us as coaches. That valuing, it isn't just our values as us personally, what we bring to the table, but it's being able to see and respect and see value in all people. So whether that's our coaching staff, so our personnel, from everything from our trainers and our therapists, all the way to the people on the bench with us, to people who, you know, are our strength and conditioning coaches. Then we also are talking about the referees and the officials, right? If we're at a tournament, the tournament officials, people who are working, you know, to ensure that the entire fairness of the tournament is being upheld. All of those people deserve to be valued, because if we do not have all of the pieces, our sports don't exist. And it's so important for us to understand, to not only bring our value to our athletes, but to all aspects of people operating in our game. Then we look at our critical thinking, and it is different than the problem solving. The critical thinking is a little bit more of that ability to evaluate different potential choices. So you're able to see option 1, 2, and 3. You're able to think down each pathway of 1, 2, and 3, and then you're able to make the right choice that's going to benefit all people of your team. So that ability to not just be, oh, this seemed like the good idea, but actually being able to critically break them down and make those choices. Also, the ability to update your knowledge. So exactly what we're doing here today, that critical thinking, getting other perspectives, learning more. That's going to reflect on your coaching practices and what you bring to the table. So those are really great. And I'm glad you're here today again. Then we look at our leading, and we're going to break down exactly what we're doing right now, our performance leadership. So the decisions of the group versus the decisions of the self. So your leadership needs to take into account the individuals on our team, as well as the bigger picture on how those individuals fit together and feed that bigger picture. Formulate and share visions. So it's not just being able to follow something, but are you yourself developing and bringing that vision to the program? Are you creating activities that also reflect and echo the vision? So they're not just talking about it. Again, we talked about talk is talk, action is power. And so having that vision, but can you actually bring it into actionable activities your athletes will resonate with and go through to reinforce your vision? Then the last one we have is that interacting. So again, after we've done all of that, the interacting, how is that exchange going with not only our coaches, but also with our athletes, right? If you really want to create higher performing athletes, you do need to create a relationship with them. Communicate is huge. So if you're having a hard time, or you get nervous when you're standing in front of a group, maybe in front of your team at the pregame speech, there is nothing wrong with writing down a couple notes to have with you. They will never see that as weakness. Being prepared is never a weakness. So if you ever wanted to do some research more on this, if it isn't something that you've thought about or heard about, there's a link down here that you can follow and you can learn more. From those core competencies, we have outcomes. So by having those 5 core competencies, well flushed out, in theory, our national coaching certification should then say that these are potential outcomes from those coaches. We're able to make ethical decisions. We have great analysis of performance. We can look at our training plans, work on the fly, provide support to those athletes. So we actually have the ability to support those athletes and turn them into higher performing. We have the ability to design a sports program. We can make practice plans. We can manage the sports program. So not only design it, but actually make it work. so it doesn't fall apart on us on the operational side. And then eventually, right, support the competitive experience. Because ultimately, if we didn't have athletes that wanted to compete, we wouldn't be here coaching. So a huge part as leaders is that we need to develop diverse paradigms. And again, when I go back to what I say, I like working on the definition of words. I had to look up paradigm. I wasn't 100% sure what that meant. And when I looked it up, it opened up a whole new perspective. Paradigms are a framework of containing the basic assumptions, the ways we think, the methodology that are commonly accepted by members of a scientific community. So for example, those cognitive frameworks, how we were conditioned to think. And that is something that is very, very important to take into consideration as we look at developing athletes. How are they developed to think? There's in psychology, when I was taking psychology in school, there was, and some of you might know it as the Pavlov's dog kind of experiment or theory. There would be a ringing of a bell, showing of a meat treat, the dog would salivate, the dog would eat the treat. Ring the bell, salivate, meat, treat, eat. Ring, salivate, meat, treat, eat. Eventually, you took the meat out of the equation, ring the bell, and the dog is salivating, expecting to eat a treat. That is a classical conditioning example. And that is what we go through as human beings. We don't want to think of it that way, but it's 100% is the reality. How we were brought up, the things that our parents harped on, you know, whether it was turning the lights off behind us, cleaning our room, putting our dishes away after we were done a meal, those things stick with us. And so when we understand that from a psychological way, then we need to then understand that that is also what we could potentially be doing to our athletes. If we are not setting them up in that properly functioning conditioning, then they may not be able to give the results they hope in the first place. So we have to understand that they're coming in with already predetermined conditioning, and that's their paradigm. That's how they see the world. That's how they understand the world. So again, I really enjoy these quotes. And Abby is a championship soccer player from the States, and she has an amazing book called Wolfpack, and it says, claim your power, bring along your full humanity, clear the way for others to do the same. Because what our families, our companies, and the world need is nothing more, spelling mistake, pardon me, and nothing less than exactly who we are. And that is a huge part where I say, bring your best self every day. You don't need to try and be me. You don't need to be any of the other amazing coaches that you've seen on this presentation. You just need to be you. You are exactly what your athletes need, and you are enough. And it is vital that you bring your best self every day to those athletes. They need you. Not only those athletes, but your families and our companies. Our world needs us. So let's look down a little deeper. That paradigm theory that I talked to you about, those again are the experience that they've shaped who we are, our upbringings, the way that we see the world. The facts of life are harder to see in a certain frame because of the way that we were conditioned to see the world, right? So taking the time to listen more and putting ourselves into the position of others, that put yourself in someone else's shoes, those are extremely important, because we need to create diverse paradigms so then we can bring ourselves to our athletes and accept them for where they are right now and who they are. So by understanding that us as a coach, we're going to have biases in the way that we approach our coaching. Knowing that will then stimulate, and I hope spur you into continuing to do what you're doing today, is by expanding your knowledge, listening to a different perspective, and potentially relating to other people's opinions, and therefore opening up your paradigm. And a really great quick story that kind of helps you understand to relate and see it in the everyday was the story this gentleman told me about when he was on a plane, and this kid next to him was screaming and yelling, and he was so frustrated, and flying is so stressful, especially nowadays, that he was losing his patience. He couldn't handle this kid being noisy. He was wanting to look over at the parent and to say, can you please control your child? And eventually, I think he leaned over to the guy, he said in a polite way, excuse me, is there any way you can ask your child to sit down and to remain calm? And I don't know exact words, but that was the gist of what he was trying to get to that guy. And the guy looked over at him almost as if he didn't even hear him and said, oh, I'm so sorry. We just got back from the hospital. My wife had passed away. We're not 100% sure of where our lives are going right now. I apologize. And immediately in that moment, when that man was being vulnerable and expressing the difficulties or even just the realities of his life, the kid was no longer an issue. You were able to approach that situation at a much more understanding, accepting. And so what happened in that situation is the man who was aggravated and annoyed by the kid, his paradigm changed. He was then able to understand that the reality of someone else's situation was different. And when he opened up those facts to what could be why what he's seen in real life is the way it is, the kid acting up, the dad not paying attention to the kid, he was then able to go, oh, I see the real thing that's happening here, and I have empathy for you. So that's why I kind of wanted to spend that much time talking to you about paradigms, because we all have different ones and we see the world from our paradigm. And so by opening up our understanding, even as what Amy did at the very beginning, recognizing the land that we're on is opening up our paradigms. It's understanding from someone else's side and being able to meet them where they're at, to see the real facts, not the interpretation of facts. So I just wanted to hit that hard there for you. Bringing our best self every day is also our professional identity. And again, at the very beginning of the presentation, I told you about all of the great things that I have on my resume, but I really wanted to hit home all of the great things that are who I am, right? The achievements of what we achieve on our resume or our CV, I mean, they're great and they make us feel good and they're amazing when we're trying to get a job, but they're not who we are and they're not our value. The fact that I love going out and paddleboarding and motorcycle riding and snowboarding, like those are who I am. And that tells me that I love being active and I love using my body. So that is just as important to me being able to bring my best self as also knowing that I have credentials and I've won awards and you know what I mean? So those two things, your professional identity is important, but it is not only how we see ourselves and value ourselves. And there's some really amazing books, and a book that I really dug into and I listened, I owned it in a hard copy and I needed it so much that I got it on audio copy as well from Audible. And I would listen to it while I'm stuck in my traffic because I live, like I said, in Vancouver. So I would listen to it, and it's called How Women Rise. And it was actually given to me as a gift from a program that I was in, a mentoring program that I was in. And it is so powerful. And if you've never, ever seen this book, I highly recommend, even if you're going to do it on audio, just spend the time to just spend, what is it, $8 or something, just download it and listen to it if you're a female and you want to excel in your career, because it breaks down so many of those, what I would call one-way streets, where you see men acting a certain way in the industry of sport and females thinking, oh, I need to be 10 times better to be able to then present myself. So for example, you might think, I must have all of the credentials, I must have the training, I must have completed with a 98% A+ status before I could even apply for this job. Whereas sometimes males, not all, but males in our industry will say, yeah, I can do that job. Well, do you have the certification? No. Do you have the academic training of it? Something close to it, but they'll still apply for the job. And they'll still talk to the people at the job as if they have all of those things, that they're just faking it, if you were to say, in layman's term. And they get the jobs all the time, and they get the promotions, and they get the attention, and why don't we do that as women? And why don't we value ourselves in certain ways that men do all the time without even thinking about it? So this book is an amazing book to help you separate that professional identity and that self-worth, and to marriage them together, and to stand like a courageous Amazon woman, but not offensive, but strong in front of those people and get those jobs. So I would definitely say that's a great book. Look it up, and it'll help you with that professional identity. And then that last area about bringing our best self is our humanity, right? Just like with the athletes, when we asked who's that person in the uniform, what are their experiences, their heritage, identity, pronouns, we have to ask ourselves that, right? All of those things are important. I'm pretty close. I wouldn't say that we're good friends, but we're pretty close acquaintances. Howie Draper, the head coach of the University of Alberta Pandas, and he also just recently came back with the U18 Team Canada girls with a gold medal championship. But my mother worked a lot with Howie, and they actually worked together to even get the University of Alberta team going in 1997. And so when I was talking with Howie just on the phone the other day, and also too, he shared a video that he did. And in his video, and also what he was talking to you about, he just mentions that the most important thing, because a lot of people will go to him and say, how do you develop such a great culture on your team? How do you bring such good themes to your short competitions? Like, where does this come from? And a big thing is, the most important thing in building culture is bringing yourself to the group, and understanding that the group is not there for your successes as a coach. It's not about the coach's ego. The coach is there in servitude of the player, of the team. And when the coaches arrive with that mentality, with that humanity, and what those experiences are that they brought in their lives to the team, and they serve, that's where you're really going to start seeing some incredible situations happening when you get into those grit moments, those fortitude moments of, are we going to make it or are we not? Because when you're equally skilled, there's that something else that helps you win the championship. So it's that valuing people that we talked about in the core competencies. So again, these are resources for supporting leadership. There's that How Women Rise book that I was talking to you about. This one here is really awesome. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think I read that one 3 or 4 times. Swagger is a really great one if you like a little bit of profanity and just straight upness. It's a pretty amazing read. And also too, I was so fortunate to actually get a presentation by Leslie, and she's just such a great spirit, and she really, really knows how to kick people in the butt to just show that swagger. Never Splitting the Difference is an amazing book if you are someone in a leadership role and you are looking at trying to negotiate and fight for your value because you know what you deserve. And like I said, that equal counterpart of a male standing at the same position, it's a great book for learning how to very professionally, very politely get what you want. Daring Greatly, I love that vulnerability. I'm a huge person that really feels that if I allow athletes and coaches to be vulnerable, that we can break through some major barriers. And another one here is the leadership and self-deception. This was a huge one for, again, that paradigm idea. This book here helped me get a better understanding of that. I don't want things to happen a certain way, that preconceived, you're going to be late. You're always going to be late. You're never on time kind of mentality, that maybe you're already judging somebody or a situation. And therefore, because you've already predetermined it, you're actually, it's kind of like one of those weird things, like in a Marvel movie, it's like, if you know the future, are you going to change the future? Well, it's that same idea. If you're already predetermining a situation, you subconsciously start to fulfill actions that make that predetermined outcome a reality. So it's a really great book to kind of break up that self-sabotage just on the way that you've predetermined situations. As we move forward here into our last section, just checking my time, I now want to break down to, so we've talked about kind of what that high performance, we broke it down to more performance. Then we talked about how we bring ourselves as a leader. And then now, how are we actually creating that high performance for our athletes? Well, we need to know that we're working and focusing on the physical aspect of it. How are they training? You know, how are they developing with the bodies they have? How are we supporting them with the demands of our sports when it comes to their physical bodies? What sections, an upper body, lower body, core, mental demands, and the actual thinking and the processing of it. But then on the flip side, there's the emotional, right? That humanity. So creating environments that foster the development of the performance, we must account for planning in each of these areas. And remember, they don't have to be led by the same person. As a coach, I don't have to do all three of these areas, but what I do have to do is I have to empower and delegate my personnel and understand their strengths to put them in the proper areas so the athletes can then benefit. So again, how to create performance habits. Vince Lombardi is a football player. So I think it's really interesting where he's talking about chasing and catching because he's a quarterback. And so that's a big, I think he's a quarterback. It's a big part of his life is football. So one of his quotes is, "We are going to relentlessly chase perfection, knowing that we will not catch it. We're going to chase it, but we know we're not going to catch it. But we will chase it relentlessly because in that process, we will catch excellence." And that's a huge, powerful thing is, again, it's that reiteration of the process versus the actual results. So when we talk about in our teams and in our structures, how are we supposed to create these performance habits? Well, in the physical preparation, right? That's kind of where that discipline fits into. That discipline is what's going to help us have the physical preparation and results. So that might be, you know, the discipline and the preparation in your tryout assessments, the beginning, the mid, and the final end of your season for your testing. What are those baselines and how are they shifting, right? Monthly and weekly training plans, not just a general year, but what are your daily, your weekly, your monthly? Are you flexible and can you be flexible to adjust in those situations? What's the plan? So instead of doing it by yourself, are you planning it with your strength and conditioning coach? Have you considered where it fits in your short-term competition? So you don't have your strength and conditioning coach demanding something from your athletes, and then you set them up for a failure because they're about to go into a short-term competition. And then making sure that your practice plans reflect the demands of the game. So when we want to create those high performance habits in our training situations, we need to think about, how are we setting them up in the physical aspects? Because we know that's a huge factor of their success. And that's where our discipline can come into. Then we look into the mental preparation when we talk about our sport. And I'm sorry, I'm trying keeping it general because I don't want to talk specifically about my sport. I want you to be able to reflect it into yours. So is there a clear outline of the attitude, the expectations, the respect, and the rules of your team? Because if not, then they're not going to show up mentally prepared and the way that you need them to. Use your sport specific exercises and drills to assess the knowledge. So use the very specific elements of your sport, how the game is executed, what's the strategy, and then see where are they at and how much do you have to develop. Ensure that the instruction is being used correctly with terminology. So if you're trying to teach new concepts, don't just make up terminology. Try to find actual sport-specific terminology that fits within what they will hear down the road in more of a higher state when they get to university and they're in that higher performing environment. Don't kind of, put them on a crutch by giving them weird vocabulary that they'll never hear or another coach may never use. So provide those resources. Don't just talk to them and teach them, but give them stuff to take home with them. Give them worksheets to work through. Take time and have a presentation about it. Work on visualization, imagery. If they don't even know what that is, teach them, right? Give them playbooks. Takes the pressure off of having to learn everything in the time that you see them. It's like a subject they can take it home and study. Feedback. Why are we doing all of this in the mental preparation? Because they need to have fortitude. Why do we care about fortitude? Because we want to win a game. We want to win a championship. We want to have a dynasty. That takes fortitude. Then again, on our last aspect of developing our athletes is the emotional preparation that we bring to our environments, starting with the knowledge and safe and inclusive space. Nobody is going to put themselves out there to potentially do something that is uncomfortable if they don't feel safe, if they don't feel like they can make mistakes and come out unjudged. You need to establish that as a coach. Everybody is accountable because everybody's putting in the work. You make sure that everybody's putting in the work, and therefore everybody's accountable. There is no special treatment to one athlete, whether they're your star or whether they're on your fourth line. Everybody is putting in the work, so everybody is the same, and accountability. Team building, try to find those exercises that reflect the vision that you want them to go through, the themes that you want them to associate with. We need to have some kind of tactical thing where we go through it. I like to use a lot of questionnaires, journaling. I like to use game time notes. I leave little notes on the bench. They go out for warm up, they come back, they see these notes, we have our branding on it. And it's just little tiny things to help them emotionally. If I know that I have someone who overthinks and someone who's always very, like spiked and ready to go, right? I know I have to bring them down a bit. People who are more chill, relaxed, I got to get them up a bit. So I use what I call game time notes and little verbal cues and stuff from our relationship and knowing who they are and what's important to them to help them. It's specific. I'm acknowledging their humanity. So those are areas that I want to challenge you. And again, you can use these slides later to say, okay, am I doing certain characteristics of this? And this is just a few points. We could spend lots of time building this and making them longer lists, but this is just kind of what I was putting together to help give examples for you. Again, these are resources for creating performance. So you can go through the links. That's that Wolfpack book that I thought was so awesome, right? And this one here, this Big Life Journal, has a lot of actual, if you want things of not just reading, but actual activities where they work through stuff, worksheets and stuff. The Big Life Journal is amazing to be able to go through that. And again, we all naturally feel alone and imperfect. It's those times of that great vulnerability where the moments where we can gain the most potential growth. So just remember, broken things can always be made whole again, or they're made into other things that are even better. And we can always keep pushing and becoming stronger. So I just wanted to thank you again for today, just to go through again some of the stuff that we talked about. We talked about those 4 main factors. There was that, neuro and muscular. So what physical athlete do we have in front of us with their makeup and their biochemistry? Then, you know what I mean? Like it was, how are they doing with the mental state? How are they doing with the psychological state? And then finally, how was it on that emotional, that external environments, all those things that make them up and who they are. And then finally, when we join with that athlete, we bring in that 4th factor and that coach and that support, and we can work with family and other people to support our athletes the way we know how they need to be. So I just want to thank you so much for everything. We still have a little bit of time, so if there's any questions or comments, go right ahead. But just thank you so much for your time. And I hope we again got another perspective of how we can create those environments for our athletes. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Whitney. Right now I'm feeling really grateful that we get to work together, because I have so many questions that I want to really flesh out with you more. So I'm excited. There's a few points that I wrote down, and I'm so grateful that you brought them up. And I think one being that the fact that you define high performance, and I don't know that this is a problem in other sports, but in hockey, we see people marketing high performance to 6-year-olds. And I think it's so important to recognize that is not what it should be at 6, right? High performance is that next level, right? So I'm grateful that you brought that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So many
Yeah.
problems. And I'm glad you related back to the long-term athlete development, right? Because it is such an important thing to understand, is like there are different levels, right? High performance may not be right here, but there is a point where that shift happens, and that it's because it's age appropriate, right?
Yeah.
We're capable. Yeah.
It's really important to just really understand, what is building up to high performance. You need to have performance before you can have high performance, right? So it's just really, stressing on the factors that will get you there and not the results.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important point, is like it's a pathway, right? It's not, the results come later.
Yeah.
I also want to just like, I love that you brought up the role of vocabulary, and that's something that I think got echoed yesterday when Shannon Windsor was talking about like building out their tech packages. They have specific vocabulary, and so as coaches, it's like they set the vocabulary. If one of them's not using that vocabulary, they subtly call each other out and be like, hey, remember, we're using this terminology, because vocabulary is so important.
Yeah.
And it again, it's not only like a performance factor, it's also a mental factor, and it's an emotional factor, because there can be confusion if we don't have that same common language.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I don't know that I have any questions. Actually, the one question, and it's something that I will probably follow up with you later, but I love that idea of the game time notes. And I know of players that do it for themselves, especially at the collegiate and professional level, but I'm wondering how you're actually utilizing that. Cause like, I'm picturing a hockey bench, like where are you putting those notes? And how have you seen those players utilize those notes in game?
Yeah. So I've worked in both, whether you have a dressing room or you have actual stalls. That's a beautiful luxury. But even just where they makeshift their stalls, where they put their bags, if you're on an away rink, or even in a different dressing room, whether you're in a gym or not. So the way that my structure is, and I find that you have to find the right structure for your pregame. But for me, if I talk to them a lot before we're about to go into the field of play, sorry, then they're too heady. So we do a lot of that at the beginning. We get really heady at the beginning. We talk about, whether it's reinforcing the physical strategies that we've been working on the week before prior to the series. So we'd get that, or we kind of talk that. We call that the chalk talk. So we chalk talk it up. Then they go and they do their warm up. So while they're doing their physical preparation, I'm lucky. I don't really work with really young kids where I have to go and monitor them. So I have older athletes, and I usually have a leadership group, and they monitor themselves. So I have time at the dressing room, and I would have prepared the notes in advance. And they're basically, if you were to take like a full sheet of paper and cut it into 4, that's about how big the piece that I'm leaving the athlete is a small little quad of a regular sheet of paper. But what I've done is, when I say I have our branding on it, like we have our team logo on it, there's a nice little box that has a nice border with our colors on it, and it says game time notes again with our colors. And so what I'll do with that note is, again, whether it's someone who's struggling, I've had athletes that are they're just struggling. Maybe they're taking new medication. I mean, that's a reality of life. Their parents have changed their medication, and they've confided in me that sometimes things aren't working as good. And so I might give them a little mental bump to say, you know what I mean? Like, just remember the stuff we did in practice. Remember to keep, if it was like a defense in front of the net, I'll give them actionable things. So like, remember when you're getting underneath the stick and you're pushing them clear, or remember we're moving pucks to the corner. Or if it's an athlete that's really good and they just need, that little emotional, right? So there's all those 3 factors. And so sometimes it's an emotional one, right? Where it might be like, remember that, and sometimes I get emotional when I talk about it too, just because I connect with them on such an aggressive level. And I say aggressive in a positive, not in a mean, it's just my vocabulary. But I connect with them on a very real level, even sometimes with some of the Team BC stuff, when I was just a support in some of the camps, and I knew that the kids wanted to make this team, some of those notes were affirmations of, you have put everything you can into this competition up to this point. Believe that what you did was enough and everything after is out of your control. Like, you know what I mean? And so sometimes it's that ability to resonate with each individual athlete. It could be physical, technical things they got to remember in their game, or it could be emotional triggers that help them focus, or just, again, touch on that humanity, fills their heart up, gets their shoulders relaxed and back. And I come from a very aggressive kind of, oh, get her done, farm girl family mentality. So to me, when I think about sports, I've played a lot of physical sports. So it's that going into battle, we're going into the arena to compete. And I always use words of, we have permission to do this, especially in female hockey and female sport. I'm always letting them know, you have permission to be loud. You have permission to be aggressive. It is encouraged, because I find in other aspects of our lives, their social norms don't reflect the sport they've chose. And so I want to allow them to express in both aspects. When we're at the dinner table, we'll act a certain way. When we're in the hockey rink, we'll act a certain way. And I just open that up to let them know it's okay. So that's how I use the notes, and they'll change throughout the years, and they'll do it multiple times. It's not just a one and done. We do it quite often, multiple games.
I really like that. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for
No problem.
sharing your knowledge. It was fantastic.
Yeah. I hope, like I said, I hope I kind of was able, my brain can be a lot. So I tried to put it into some nice, clear, as we talked about communication, keeping it clear.
Yes, it was very clear. So great job.
Awesome. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. These things are amazing that you're doing. So I appreciate, Amy, that you're doing this, because it's huge, especially as women, that we come together and we don't fight each other and we don't wish for other people to do bad while we do good. So this is a huge camaraderie and a wonderful push in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you.